are now going to look at some scenarios. These are things that are typically happening in classrooms across the school district. The first scenario is called First Things First. You are told to report to a school that is new to you. How soon should you begin planning your day, and what are the most critical questions to ask? You should start planning your day as soon as you find out that you are going to be subbing at that school. Some questions that you should ask would be, how do I get to the school? Where do I park my car? Do I have any students in my classroom with severe health issues, perhaps a severe allergy? How many students in the classroom will be leaving the room for special services? What are their names? What times of day will they be leaving the classroom? The next scenario we will be looking at is video etiquette. The lesson plan requires you show a video, and the moment you start, several heads go down for nap time. You don't sub in your content over a teacher's content. Many times a teacher will leave behind a video just because it is an easy thing to leave for a substitute. You might not understand how relevant that video is to the content that that teacher is teaching. It may be very, very relevant, so please just show the video and follow the directions that the teacher has left behind. What do you do when a student is texting on his or her cell phone during the lesson? This is an important thing because this will happen. The first thing we're going to suggest that you do is stand by the student. More than likely they will put their phone away. If they don't put their phone away and they're continuing, that would be another opportunity to kneel down and have a discussion with the student, asking them to please put away the cell phone. If they flat out refuse, that might be when you contact the office and ask for some help. If you have students who put their head down for a nap, we suggest leaving the lights on. Nothing says that you have to watch a video in the dark. Using proximity is another opportunity to get students to follow along with what your expectations are. And setting those expectations at the beginning is very important. So letting students know ahead of time, you will be sitting up, we'll be watching this movie together, and these are some things that I want you to be looking for as you're watching this video.
Scenario 3 is titled Musical Chairs and really has to do with student seating within the classroom. So there is no seating chart. To take roll, or there is a seating chart and you notice kids scrambling at the last minute. What might you do with these two situations? First of all, if there is no seating chart and you're ready to take roll, it kind of depends on your setting. At the elementary level, typically you do not need a seating chart. Elementary students are pretty territorial of their desks and their seats, and they will quickly let you know if someone is in their desk or not sitting where they should be. This would typically be more of an issue at the secondary level, and many of our secondary teachers will leave a seating chart, but some do not have formalized seating within their classroom. I would give the advice that if there is no seating chart, you let students sit, you take roll, and you monitor how they do in their spots during that day. If you have to move students, you can politely ask them to move because they're talking or they're off task. The second one here, there is a seating chart and you notice kids scrambling at the last minute. I think you have to use your best judgment in this situation. You ask students to please sit in their assigned seats. If you have some inclination that students are sitting out of their assigned seats, you might wait and see how that goes. You may have to move them throughout the day. Those are some possible strategies to handle student seating within your classroom. All right, let's move on to scenario 4. This one is titled The Hook, and older students might be more adept at this. A student asks you a personal or off-task question. For example, are you married, or how do you feel about drugs? I think it's a very fine line in building relationships with your students, but also not getting too personal or giving them too much of your personal information. A lot of times I like to start the class off with telling them a little bit about myself, just so they know who I am and a little bit about me, so that kind of eliminates the need or desire to ask further questions. Maybe let them know that I've lived in Boise and that I'm married and have a couple kids, and that That's all I'm going to share, and we're getting started with the lesson. Oftentimes being proactive by giving them a little bit about yourself can avoid more personal questions. There are certainly questions that are inappropriate. How do you feel about drugs? That is not a topic you want to get into. Are you married? That's going to be your own personal decision whether you choose to answer that question or not. But oftentimes students want to take over the lesson and ask a bunch of questions and get you off task. And you as the professional, it's important to remain on topic and to keep those students moving in the right direction.
The next scenario we will talk about is called the entertainer. You have an especially disruptive student who seems to be the ringleader of the class. A favorite ploy in engaging the guest teacher is the statement, Mr. or Mrs. Blank always lets me use the computer, go to the restroom, get a drink, sit next to. So let's talk about that especially disruptive student first, the one that appears to be the ringleader. An idea that sometimes works really well with these students is keeping them busy, giving them a task, having them be your classroom helper. I know that sometimes it appears that you are giving them attention when they don't deserve that attention, but they're looking for attention. So let's give them some positive attention rather than giving them negative attention. The other student that's always likes to say that the classroom teacher allows them to do things, you can just say something as simple as, that's fine. I understand that Mrs. Jones allows you to do this, but today I'm the teacher and we're going to be doing it differently, but you are welcome to write a note to Mrs. Jones and let her know how wrong I was, and I'm sure she'll be happy to read that and take care of it when she returns to the class. The next scenario we're going to discuss is expect the unexpected. Be prepared for unforeseen circumstances or changes. Be flexible. Principals can change your sub-assignment at any time if there is a need. So what this scenario is actually getting at is don't expect your day to be normal. There are always things that happen in a school that are out of your control and out of everyone else's control. So being flexible, having a good attitude, and being helpful is going to be, it's going to make your day much better than if you expect something to be a particular way and it turns out not to be.
The next scenario we would like to discuss is titled Injury in the Classroom. Accidents can happen in the classroom and around the school. Number 1, a student falls over a chair in the classroom and hits his head on the corner of another desk. He is bleeding and in distress. You should. 2, you as the guest teacher see a student take what you consider a bad fall on the playground or PE class. You ask if he or she is okay and the student's reply is yes. You should. After giving some time to think about this scenario and how you might handle a student injury within the classroom under your care, this is another one of those that I talked about in terms of you must report right away. Anytime a student is injured and you see blood, or especially a head injury, you need to take all precautions with this student and they need to see the nurse or health professional right away within the building. So if a student were to fall over in a chair in the classroom and hit his head, it would be important for you to respond quickly, to not necessarily move that student, to have another student make a phone call to the nurse's office, to have the nurse come to the classroom. You may even send a student or 2 students to the hallway to the office to find the nurse. But certainly head injuries are a major concern in today's day and age, and you would want that checked out quickly by the nurse or health professional. Our next scenario is titled Food in School, Improvising and Knowing Your Clientele. A class party, a birthday or holiday or special occasion, and a parent brings 20 cookies. However, there are 22 students in the classroom. You should do what? Are there any red flags in this area? Hopefully right away you're thinking about the issue of allergies. And allergies have become a big issue in society today, and especially in our schools. And it is our responsibility to make sure that our students are safe and that we are aware of their allergies and we are not providing any food that may cause an allergic reaction. So that's the big concern when we talk about food in school and a class party. is making sure that you understand who has allergies and we're aware of how to avoid any allergic reactions. The other part of this scenario talks a little bit about not having enough cookies for your students. And I think a couple of strategies you could use here is you could cut the cookies in half, and then would have plenty for the classroom. Or oftentimes teachers have alternative snacks within the classroom, and possibly you might have a couple students that would prefer that alternative snack rather than a cookie. That seems like a pretty easy solution to work through.
So the next scenario, 9, is safety first. As a guest teacher, it is imperative to be educated on the emergency procedures and safety protocol in the school. If a student shares with you that another student has talked to him about killing herself, we expect that you let someone in the office know. That needs to be reported that day as soon as possible. We do not ask that you do any investigating. That is something that the school administrator, school nurse, or school counselor will take care of. During a fire drill, when you enter the classroom in every school in the Boise School District, you will find an evacuation map. Those maps are posted at the exterior doors of each classroom, and it gives you 2 routes, the first route and a second route, dependent upon whether or not there's a blocked entry or exit. Make sure you know where those doors are located. Your classroom students will know exactly where to go on those drills, and you can ask in advance where it is that you go, or you can have a reliable student tell you where it is that you will go. We also ask that anytime you leave the classroom for a drill or for any other reason with your students, you take your orange emergency bag with you. Now that's not when you're taking the students to PE or music, but it's when you're leaving for a drill or leaving for a field trip. Inside those orange emergency bags, you will find a first aid kit. You will find emergency meds, perhaps for students that might need something. You will find a class roster with phone numbers. There's a lot of really good information and supplies in those bags. Please make sure that you find those bags when you first come into the building. During a lockdown and during an evacuation, all of our procedures for evacuations and lockdowns are on the back of your badge. So if you turn over your substitute badge, you will find the procedures for those. Please make sure that you follow those. The next scenario, number 10, field trips. What is your common avenue to address the following occurrences? So suppose that you're on a field trip and the bus is late. What are you going to do with those students to pass the time? During group time, a student's possessions are taken. How will you handle this situation? Let's talk about the field trip first. It's always a good idea, no matter on a field trip or any other time during the school day, it's always a good idea to have an idea in mind of how you would pass some time. You never know. You could have an assignment and the power goes out, and now all of a sudden you don't have the technology you needed for that particular lesson. So having a game or some kind of an activity that you can play with the kids is a good idea. Always having something in your back pocket to fill about a 30-minute chunk of time is a good idea. What do we do when someone's possessions are taken? This is tricky because it can take a lot of your time to investigate. But we do ask that you investigate first. Ask the students who may have seen, that were witnesses, if they have information, and then you can turn that over to the office. It's our job in the school office to take care of any kind of issue that deals with theft or misplacement of items, if that is indeed what happened in this particular case. But having some details that you can share with your school administrator are helpful, and then we will take over from there.
Scenario 11, titled Terrible Twos or Terrible Teens, really has to do with insubordination, a student refusing to follow directions, maybe being disruptive during your instruction, or not working after the instructions and assignment have been given. These can be typical misbehaviors, and again, I think it's important to not take these behaviors personal, to understand that the student behavior comes from a place, and to be patient and positive when addressing these issues. So you might think just for a short bit how you would handle these common misbehaviors in your classroom. If a student is being disruptive during your instructions, it's difficult for the other students to understand what the instructions and expectations are. This particular student is impeding the learning of their peers. So it's important to address this disruptive behavior right away. Asking the student to please raise their hand, asking the student to please hold their questions or their discussion until the instructions have been made are a good first step. If the student continues to talk or be disruptive during your instructions, you can, once again, quietly approach that student, use proximity, talk to them in a nice, quiet, positive voice without really calling them out. If the behavior continues, they are becoming really insubordinate, and this may be a discipline referral to the office. Student not working after instruction and assignment have been given. Again, I think it's important to use proximity to encourage the student to get on task, to sit with the student possibly and provide some input and help them get started with the classroom activity. If the student flat out refuses to work and is not being disruptive, this may be a situation in which you pick your battle. You're with this student for 60 minutes or at the elementary for one day. If the student is not being disruptive but still refuses to work after multiple attempts, you use your best judgment whether you want to push this student, because that could lead to even more extreme behavior, or if you just give the student some choices and let the teacher know about it the following day. All right, scenario 12, we would like to discuss cheating. Cheaters never prosper. So this is a situation in which you catch a student cheating. Maybe during a test, you notice that a student has a paper out, a cheat sheet, and is copying answers from the paper. Maybe the student is looking over at the neighbor's paper during a test, or the student has an electronic device out during the test, and you suspect they're using that to cheat. I think cheating is a pretty easy scenario. I would say that, once again, stating your expectations up front is super important. If you're a guest teacher during a test or you're administering an assessment, letting the students know, I expect you to keep your eyes on your own paper. I expect you to keep your electronic devices put away during the test. Those expectations are important. Also, movement. Anytime you give an assessment or a test, it's important that you do not sit at your desk with your head down. You need to be moving about the classroom, walking past the students, monitoring their work, and even offering help from time to time. I think those are great ways to prevent cheating. However, if you do catch a student cheating, there are a couple of strategies you may use. Oftentimes, it's not even necessary to address the situation and cause a reaction within the classroom. You could simply leave a note with the classroom teacher that so-and-so was caught cheating. Maybe you tell the student, hey, I'd like you to keep your eyes on your own paper, and that's a warning for them that they need to do that. So there's a couple of strategies you could use. If you want to address the situation, I think a warning is appropriate, but always leaving a note for the teacher, letting them know that you suspect a student has cheated.
The last scenario we will look at is scenario 14, hands off. Subs should never touch kids for any reason. A student is being aggressive to another student. You ask both students to come to the office with you. One student complies and the aggressive student refuses to come. During lunchtime, you are correcting some papers for a teacher, and a student comes into the room to ask you a question. He or she goes on to say how wonderful of a teacher you are and asks if they can have a hug. Let's talk about the first one, with the aggressive student who refuses to come. Anytime you have a student who may be aggressive or definitely is amped up and they are not compliant, that is definitely when you need to involve school administration. More than likely, we know who the student is, we have a relationship with the student, and we will be able to help get that student the support that they need for them to make better decisions. The next section, where we were talking about a student requesting a hug. If you can't avoid a hug, turning it into a side hug is appropriate. But if a student is asking for a hug, that's that's a little strange. So maybe you can ask them, instead for the hug, is to give them a fist pump or a high five, something like that, rather than the hug. We really do prefer that adults are not embracing students or students embracing adults. It's just a practice that we try to avoid. Some teachers do give hugs, but you have to understand those teachers do have relationships with those students that they have built. And as a guest teacher, those relationships have not been established, so it's best just to avoid those if at all possible.